Hello, and welcome to our webinar, Integrating Sales and Operations to Create Higher Value for Customers. Today's speaker is Ted Stank, Professor of Logistics and Supply Chain Management at the Haslam College of Business, University of Tennessee at Knoxville. My name is Steve Paul. I'm a contributing editor at MITSloan Management Review, and I'll be your moderator today. Our thanks go out to Salient for their sponsorship of this webinar. This event will be recorded and will be available to all attendees approximately 3 to 4 business days after the end of the live event. In addition, today's slides will be available to all attendees. This webcast also contains an audience poll, so please complete the poll when it appears. We welcome your questions to our speakers today. To submit questions, please enter them anytime in the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen. Or you could submit questions on Twitter using the hashtag MITMREevent. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If you're having any audio difficulties while listening via computer, please call in via telephone instead. So before we begin our presentation, Integrating Sales and Operations to Create Higher Value for Customers, we'd like to begin with a poll question. Ted, I'd like you to do the honors.
Okay, Steve, thank you. I'd like to add my greetings and welcome to our registrants, and just add that today's webinar is going to cover a topic that's been a passion of mine for the better part of 25 years. In general, it addresses how organizations can better integrate knowledge of supply chain capabilities and constraints into their strategic market decisions. It's been very gratifying for me to see in the last several years that this idea has been gaining recognition, as exemplified by the increasing number of CEOs at top firms that have had supply chain experience. And I can cite companies like Apple and General Motors, Walmart, Intel, a few others that are really starting to pay attention to the benefits they can get by understanding the supply chain side of their operation. That said, most organizations still suffer from a lack of supply chain input into firm decision making. Peter Drucker called this phenomenon of a breakage between the demand creation and supply fulfillment parts of an organization the Great Divide. And during the webinar, I'll describe a senior management orientation that we've called DSI, or Demand Supply Integration, and provide case examples of how firms are using DSI to bridge the Great Divide. But before I do that, as you mentioned, Steve, I did want to find out from our audience how much issue they have with the Great Divide between demand and supply. And so we're going to go to this survey now, and Steve, I'll kick it back to you to run the survey with our participants.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. So we have a couple of questions here that we'd like to know when we play out the survey. Does your organization, and you can select any of the following options. There you go. Does your organization lose sales because supply chain cannot meet unexpected demand spikes? Or are they often incur additional costs to fulfill customer demand by expediting orders from other locations or creating urgent purchases or production runs? Or sometimes have to sell at deep discounts because of excess accumulated inventory. Possibly you may have all three of these issues, or you may have none of the above. So please complete our poll. We greatly appreciate your feedback. We're going to show the results in a few moments, but maybe now we'd like to just see, Ted, what do you think you're going to see here?
Well, my expectation is that there'll be somewhere north of 50% that experience all three of those issues. Probably the next most popular, if we were to single out any of the individual ones, would be missing sales because of unexpected demand or because of lack of communication between demand and supply. And from a supply chain side, even though it might be invisible on the sales side, often in order to achieve sales, we move things from places that are not the most efficient, or we incur extra costs in laying on second or third shifts in production, or expedited cost to our suppliers so that we can get product to customers and meet our customer service demands. So that second one about incurring extra costs is often also seen quite frequently.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to seeing the results. Just a reminder to our audience, we'll be taking questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but you can submit that at any time. Ted, let's take a look at the results.
Okay. I'm going to stop the poll then, and we'll see what we've got.
Okay, and then let's just show that to the audience. Share it.
Okay, I'm hitting the share button, but is it coming through or no?
There you go. Yep, great. So,
Okay.
wow, interesting. About a third say all of the above, and about 20% say often incur additional costs. Almost 20% say none of the above, though.
Right. That's excellent. Potentially, towards the end of our webinar, it would be great to have some of the folks that are not seeing these problems maybe submit some comments even about how they're overcoming it and able to achieve it.
Okay, well, let's get on with the presentation.
All right, great. So to steal a slide from a familiar comedian or a line, if any of these sound familiar, you probably have a great divide problem. It's not uncommon in much of the organizations that we work with on a day-to-day basis. I often tell some of my executives that I work with that I'm not pointing fingers because I think colleges of business, who should be among the most integrated organizations in the world, are probably as guilty, if not more guilty, of having these issues of demand and supply disintegration as anyone. So that said, let's talk about what the Great Divide is. As I said, Peter Drucker coined this phrase back in the 60s, and he said that in every goods and services supply chain, there's a point where the upstream supply processes are disconnected from the downstream demand creation and fulfillment processes. He called that point of disintegration the Great Divide. And it evolved naturally. Supply chain functions and operation functions in general have traditionally and historically been focused on efficiencies. And so breaking those processes separate from the downstream customer-facing processes enables operations to focus on long lead time, large volume operations to generate economies of scale in procurement, in manufacturing, and logistics. On the downstream side, it enables sales and marketing to focus on doing what they need to do to incur customer demand and raise revenues. The challenge is that there are hidden problems with this, particularly as we move into today's business environment of hyper-competition and ever-increasing customer expectations. If I had told you, Steve, a few years ago that you could buy from an online retailer and receive just about anything you wanted next day, you'd probably be pretty impressed with that. And increasingly today, particularly in big cities, we're moving to an environment where 1 hour, 2 hour, 4 hour time windows for delivery are becoming the norm. And that challenges our traditional organizational design for the way we've done supply chain operations and used it to support sales and marketing. In fact, what we tend to find in operations are hidden costs related to some of the issues I talked about earlier of having to expedite shipments of product from places not close to where the customer is because we have it in the wrong place, or we overlay a lot of our process gaps with excess inventory because we're not sure exactly what we're going to need. And even at that, we often find poor delivery service because of the disconnects between supply and demand. We don't have the kinds of products in the right places where they need to be to fulfill customer demand. On the downstream side with customers, what it often results in is lost revenue from stockouts. And if we do that enough, particularly in today's hyper-competitive environment, we lose customers for life. It often also results in hits to our margins as we sell excess stock that no one wants very much below cost. And I only have to cite the fashion industry and ask people how frequently do they buy product at full price, or do they wait for promotions in fashion before they purchase? So our research, which has been conducted with a number of firms over the years, and this specific research that we generated this framework out of was conducted over a 4-year period with over 160 managers and senior executives from 8 different companies. And this research showed us that some firms are able to derive market cost and asset benefit by adopting a purposeful orientation to drive change. Again, we've called this orientation the demand-supply integration. And it actually involves balancing demand creation with supply fulfillment strategically so that we understand what our supply capabilities and constraints are, and that we target our marketing and demand creation towards those things that we can provide profitably to customers. And therefore, we move away from the kind of things that are constraints. Importantly, we move this signal, this integration of marketing, not only across our internal supply chain, but also externally to our supply chain partners. What we've seen is organizations that are able to achieve this kind of bridging of the Great Divide are able to both exploit and leverage efficiency-focused operations and still maintain relevant levels of effectiveness for customers of choice. And I mentioned that phrase, customers of choice, and it probably bears drawing out. I will touch on it several times over the course of our webinar. But what I mean with customers of choice is a conscious understanding and segmentation of our customer base to know, A, what are the differentiation in our customers in terms of the kinds of value that they want, not only from products, but also from the services wrapped around those products. How quickly do they want it? What kinds of variants do they want in the product? What kinds of quality standards do they need, etc. And to be able to understand the different segmentation in the customers around that value creation. Once we understand that, and that's clearly a marketing function of understanding that, we need to align that with our supply chain capabilities to deliver that kind of value at a profit. And then make strategic decisions about whether, if we are short on those capabilities, do we want to spend the money to develop them? Can we get them from external partners? Or perhaps is it a business segment that we no longer think we should compete in because we cannot do so profitably? I'd also note at this point that several tactical activities like sales and operations planning, lean, vendor-managed inventory, all fall under the strategic umbrella of demand and supply integration, as we'll see as I go through the different elements of DSI. The research revealed 5 distinct stages of DSI that management must ensure are in place in order to achieve the kind of benefits that top firms are finding. These start with a high-level focus that we've called relevant value focus, move through enablers, integrated knowledge sharing, strategic resource allocation, integrated behaviors, and finally to the operational level of capacity and demand balance. And again, I will go through and define each of these in the next few slides, and then at the end provide 4 different case examples of companies that are at different stages of their journey towards DSI. The first part of the activity in bridging the Great Divide with DSI is what we've considered if you want to use a bridge building analogy, we've considered it the foundation, something that has to be in place before demand and supply integration can even have a chance to succeed. And that is a senior management orientation that shifts the strategic focus of the organization to creating optimal value for both the focal organization and customers of choice. It is the first stage of the organization's path to DSI, and it's got to be maintained throughout. We have seen organizations start off with great senior management support, only to have management focus change and lose focus on the topic, and to have the rest of the initiatives lose steam and ultimately not achieve their goals. Relevant value focus has a few key elements. It starts with senior leadership representation on top management teams and an orientation of that senior leadership to really focus on creating value as opposed to a cost orientation or a pure revenue market share orientation. Some of the companies that we've been working with have as their overarching metrics that contribute to this orientation things like gross management or rolling margin, gross margin or rolling gross margin over 12 months, cash conversion cycles, so the speed at which investments can be converted into sales, and inventory days, so a capture of how much inventory are we using to kind of cover the gaps in our processes. Organizational structure is another element. We have to have representation and voice of both the market and the supply chain in top management teams that are making strategic decisions. We've begun a pretty aggressive research program within the last year looking at top management team composition to see whether there is a voice of the market and a voice of the supply chain on the senior management executive team so that we can really have this true demand and supply integrated perspective. And then finally, metrics are really key. As I mentioned before, one of the big red flags we see is that if there is an overarching drive towards sales at any cost or market share at any cost or cost reduction at all costs, it generally indicates a lack of focus on this optimal value creation. We've pulled some quotes out for each of these 5 stages from the interviews we conducted with participants to try to epitomize what this meant. And one of the best ones that we heard was one of the senior executives saying, "We've refocused our organization on selling right, not selling more." The second stage is called integrated knowledge sharing, and it really is the pillar upon which this bridge over the Great Divide must rest. It's about being able to truly understand the knowledge networks needed to generate and disseminate and also have a shared interpretation of that information, both across the internal parts of the firm as well as across customer and supplier networks as we try to inform this product and service value creation. Each functional area, including customers and suppliers, have to share their particular piece of the knowledge puzzle to ensure that relevant decisions about how to create and fulfill the demand of customers of choice are made. I'll give you some examples of some cases where this information is broken down. A very big company that makes aircraft designed into a new aircraft product, levels of a special metal that, given the demand plan for the number of planes they intended to sell over a certain time period, exceeded the amount of processed metal that existed in the world supply base. So that's clearly a case where information from the supply base was not present when market decisions were being made. Requirements of integrated knowledge sharing include interfunctional collaboration. Nice, easy phrase, but a lot more complex than it sounds. So not only does it involve organizational structures to make sure people are in teams where they can talk, but also the behaviors that incentivize collaboration. Also external collaboration, both downstream with key customers as well as upstream with key suppliers. And those are goods and service providers. And then finally, the technologies that have to be in place in order for us to share this information and interpret the knowledge as we see is needed. And we've seen a lot of talk in popular press today about the Internet of Things and cloud-based systems, as well as the ability to now plumb that data that we have available using big data techniques and analytics to really try to understand and have fact-based, number-based decision making. And that all is part of this element of DSI. One of our managers said, really what we're talking about here is making sure we know what we know when we make decisions. Generally speaking, when bad decisions are made, we usually find that there's somebody in the supply chain that knew about it. We just didn't get that piece of information where it needed to go to be able to make the right decision. The next piece of the demand-supply integration bridge over the Great Divide is what we've called strategic resource allocation. Strategic resource allocation is an enabling process that addresses the financial resource allocation for specific product and service bundles based on the needs of customers of choice, not all customers, but customers of choice, capacity constraints, and the capabilities of the firm that differentiate it from competitors. Every firm has unique internal capabilities, and those should be matched as best as possible with the kind of things that we pursue and with financial support and investment in those types of activities. It is always too easy to make financial allocation decisions by spreading across all customer bases, all product lines, all service offerings like peanut butter based on what we've done in the past. And strategic resource allocation requires a discipline in financial allocation that says we're going to understand what are the customer segments, product segments, or services that align themselves best with our capabilities to deliver such that we can optimize sales and profitability across those different segments. If we can identify those, let's invest in those areas as opposed to others that may not generate as much benefit from a profitability standpoint. So as I mentioned, it requires customer segmentation. It requires an agility in understanding what are the cost-benefit trade-offs, and it also requires quite a bit of data. Therefore, that last element of integrated knowledge is very important so that we can say, if we make this decision or this decision, what are the cost-benefit trade-offs that would justify different financial support? And finally, the discipline to prioritize resource allocation. No organization has enough resources to do everything it wants to do. And so do we have the discipline and the knowledge to make fact-based decisions to support that part of our business that generates the greatest value for customers of choice at the greatest profitability and economic profit metrics for our organization? And again, from a quote standpoint, one of our executives said, we have a process in place that ensures that we invest in what we do best. The next major element of DSI gets to another enabler. So we've talked about finance and financial resources. The other major resource we have at our disposal is human resources. And integrated behavior is the enabling process that relates to how people who leverage knowledge to integrate demand and supply are empowered, educated, rewarded in ways that enable them to create value relevance for customers of choice. Oftentimes we have great strategic planning and decision-making in place, all kinds of great information support, but we don't take the time and effort to really be focused on how do our people use that information to make the right decisions at the operational level. And we're talking about customer service people, sales people, people involved in warehouse order fulfillment, people who are really at that boundary of our organization and our customers' organization. And it requires new concepts and new perspectives on education and training. It requires empowerment of employees to make decisions that most organizations have not been willing to give at the real line level, and the ability to evaluate and reward personnel for making the right decisions that create value as opposed to doing things that meet some other kind of internal standards. And of course, we have to hold people accountable as well. Again, to go to one of our quotes, one of our interviewees told us, what we have to do here is ensure that our entire extended organization pulls together towards our common goals, not apart, which is what we too often find. Our last element of DSI takes it right down to the operating level. It's what I'm calling where the rubber meets the road. And these are the execution activities that are required to physically deliver the value promised by all of our strategic and planning processes. We have to focus change from optimizing cost or service. Cost is usually the driving focus of operations, and service, doing everything that customers want, is often driving focus of our demand creation activities. We have to move that focus to delivering relevant levels of product and service values to customers of choice at a profit, given the known capacity constraints. I have seen some organizations move towards giving their sales force not sales and revenue responsibility, but profitability responsibility. Again, that requires a lot of information to bundle costs with the way sales reps are promising different product deliveries. It requires changes in planning processes. This is where we often see effective sales and operations planning processes, or integrated business planning, as the Oliver White organization calls it, come to play. It requires operational flexibility so that at one time, based on what a customer desires and what they're willing to pay, we can deliver using one bundle of supply chain capabilities. And at another time, when they want it in a different way, we use another bundle of supply chain capabilities to deliver different value. And oh, by the way, there should be pricing differentials associated with that. All you have to do is think about Amazon and how if I want something today, I can pay Amazon and they will get it to me today using certain different physical configurations. Or there's also that capability when I order from Amazon that if I don't need it until next week, I can tell them that, and they'll actually give me a discount or a credit towards purchasing something in the future. And then finally, it requires good coordination of the capacity that we do have to ensure that we're giving our capacity to the most profitable business, as opposed to that business that is more spot business that we only need really for volume. And again, to go to our quotes, one manager told us, really what we're talking about is delivering the right value using the right tools. After the framework emerged from our research, we created a diagnostic tool that consists of a set of questions that we could ask of senior managers to use it to help assess where their organization was on this journey towards full DSI. The diagnostic tool will be available to the registrants after this, but essentially what it enables us to do is to be able to really use a tool to be able to assess where each company has strengths and where its weaknesses are, and then be able to delve more deeply into those weaknesses or opportunities to figure out how to move forward on the journey. As I said, the diagnostic tool currently is available at that website for registrants who want to find that diagnostic tool and apply it. I would recommend, if they do, that they have a cross-sectional, cross-functional group of managers in their organization fill it out and figure out what the average score is, as well as where there are great discrepancies between the scores to figure out what the real truth is on that particular metric. Using that diagnostic, we've gone through and assessed several different companies, and I want to give you a little bit of a briefing over the course of the next few minutes on 4 different companies that are at different parts of the journey towards DSI. The first company, that we're calling Company A, is a company from the automotive transportation industry that is really just beginning to have the conversation about getting towards true DSI. And as we applied this across their management base, we found some really interesting practices and behaviors that really characterize where they are. For example, at the senior management level, they're not very advanced towards this orientation of having to match what they're trying to do in the market with the capabilities and investments they've made in their supply chain. Their focus is very much on cost orientation, very high capital equipment-oriented, capital asset-oriented business, and therefore their focus has traditionally been on cost minimization and cost efficiencies. And they have seen that costing them in the marketplace. Internally, they're very siloed functionally siloed. Knowledge is suboptimized. In fact, one manager told us that they have great technology within functions, but that knowledge exists as islands of information, that manager told us. And so the information is there. They just don't have the structures and processes in place to enable that information to get shared internally. And suppliers and customers aren't linked at all into their information sharing or planning processes. Planning is done internally, and the number is pushed out in a very reactive way. Their internal metrics for people are very efficiency focused, and therefore they suffer some in industry metrics on customer service. And their operational systems, again, are very much focused on driving long lead time, economies of scale type operations, which in today's marketplace they find is hurting them with customers. Second company is exactly the opposite. This company is a health and beauty care firm. Their senior management has been almost exclusively focused on go-to-market strategies that are branded. And marketing brand is the be-all, end-all in terms of their decision-making for go-to-market, often ignoring constraints and capacity shortfalls in their supply chain. They get very little planning input in their big long-term strategic decision-making from the supply chain or their upstream suppliers. And as a result, operationally, they often find themselves incurring excess costs for expedited orders, expedited shipments, because the supply chain finds itself unprepared for the kind of things that the market organization is creating in demand. Even with that, because of the lack of vision of the supply chain into the market, one manager told us that 80% of their new product launches are at least 10 days late. So even with this buildup of excess cost and inventory, they still aren't able to meet marketing demand. The next company is a fast-moving consumer goods company. And you can see, compared to the previous slide, that this company seems to have much better scores across the board on all of their different levels of demand and supply integration. I'll give you some examples. Recently, so in their recent 5-year strategic plan, they have refocused and realigned to a strategy that is really targeted towards identifying what they call strategic growth accounts. So they serve a number of different retailers in the food industry, and they have selected 12 different customers that are in the strategic growth account category, and those are reviewed periodically. Most of their strategic market objectives are now focused on growing business in those strategic growth accounts. Their new product development is conducted jointly with people from those accounts, with a real focus on speed to market and new product development that gets on those customers' aisles before it gets elsewhere. They've refocused their supply chains on really understanding those strategic growth customers' needs and how supply chains can be realigned towards providing those needs above and beyond the needs of other customer segments. A lot more collaboration with the strategic accounts, including integration and coordination of systems and analytics. And they actually said from a resource allocation standpoint that their general rule is all net new resource allocation will only go towards the strategic accounts. And they've seen some real impressive performance improvements, major reductions, 60% reductions in order cycle times to customers in the strategic accounts, and an overall reduction of inventory from 50 days of sale to 25 days of sale without capital outlay. The final firm is a firm from the electronics industry, consumer electronics. They have been in a very long journey to DSI. I'm on a slide right now that just provides some of the details of the fast-moving consumer goods firm that I just went through. Let's move now to the consumer electronics firm. This company has been in almost a 10-year journey towards DSI that started with a major shakeup in their senior leadership about 10 years ago. They have completely restructured their perspective on their marketplace. I'm going to move to the next slide now just to give you a little bit of perspective on how they see their business. They have broken their marketplace into three major segments. The top segment that it says limited selection, they call their affordable category. The middle one is the configurable category, and the bottom one is what they call their customized solutions category. And if you note that across different demand and supply activities, they have segmented and created very different go-to-market strategies and supply chain strategies for each segment based on the value they're trying to create and the price for value trade-off that they make in those marketplaces. Let me give you some of the specifics of what they're doing. This was the first organization that I heard the phrase information control towers to mean that managers that are managing a horizontal process of value delivery can plug into a information control tower that provides data transactionally from across the supply chain so that they can see at any given point in time what the status is of orders going to particular customers. They've also been able to bundle costs with those different activities so that they can get a very good sense of the cost-benefit trade-offs. They are one of the early adopters of what one of our faculty named Kate Vitasic has called vested partnerships. The vested partnership idea is we're going to measure you on output-based metrics, like how well are you helping us achieve sales, or how well are you helping us reduce cost or reduce inventory, as opposed to input-type metrics. And so it co-ops goods and service providers into our value creation organization. They use demand shaping, so they have very nimble pricing categories that they can change to try to incentivize demand towards those products that they can provide at a particular time at a profit, and away from those products that they cannot provide right now because they have some kind of supply constraint. They've invested in integrated business planning across all their business activities, and they talk about their plan being a one truth, one number that represents their idea of what they're trying to do in the marketplace, as opposed to what many organizations have is at least three different numbers: a sales target number, a financial target number, and an operations number. They talk about one truth. Interestingly, they've also simplified their product offerings. They've reduced their product lines, and they've done that based on data-based management and understanding what the contributions of products are. And they've invested a lot in their personnel in terms of training and incentivizing and measuring how their customer-facing employees are making the right decisions to incentivize customers to create maximum value for themselves at the greatest profit for the organization. They've been big adopters of lean and differentiated customer product pairings in procurement, and they have totally separate configurable ways for products to get to market based on the kinds of categories that they're in. So ultimately, this brings us to the final value proposition, what we've seen companies being able to do. Essentially what demand supply integration targets is the ability to sell more of the products to the customers where we make the most revenue and most profit, so that we get a greater share of wallet and a greater margin with those customers whose value requirements best align with our supply chain capabilities. It helps us to do that at the lowest possible total cost, not unit cost, but total cost. And finally, it enables us to do that with the minimum levels of inventory necessary to achieve those sales. So it really focuses on that overarching return on asset perspective as opposed to only a revenue or only a cost perspective side. And with that, Steve, I'm going to kick it to you for some question and answer. Welcome any questions from our participants and or comments that they may have that either exemplify some of the issues that we're talking about or provide us with some examples of what their company might be doing to try to reach this kind of demand-supply integration.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Ted. Excellent presentation. We do have a number of questions. that have come in already, some comments as well. So we're now going to move into our Q&A. Let's see now here. We'll take as many questions as time permits for the rest of the hour. Also to remind our audience that you can submit your questions by entering them into the chat box in the lower left corner of the webinar screen, or again on Twitter using the hashtag MITSMREVENT. And let's start off with a couple of questions and comments from Carl. First off, he says, so that sounds like leveraging would work to help bridge the Great Divide. What do you mean by saying selling right and not more? Does this apply to targeted sales?
So my general comment about selling right and not more really relates to understanding the margins based on total cost of delivery to a customer. And so I don't mean what most companies measure in terms of margin, which is sales price minus the direct cost of selling, but I'm also talking about the embedded costs associated with inventory, potentially hidden costs like expedited costs, et cetera, so that we can truly get an understanding of what is it costing us to deliver and sell a product or a service to a customer at a particular point in time. And therefore, we can make better decisions. And I'll try to give you a better example. One of the things that we do when we work with companies is we try to get a sense of direct customer or direct product profitability. One of the things we often find is that if you truly allocate costs appropriately to sales, you'll find that a good percentage of what we sell, we lose money on. And so what we really want to do is identify those segments or those products that we optimize profit and figure out how to grow those sales. And the ones that we lose money on, can we change the cost configuration? Maybe not deliver to you tomorrow, but deliver to you in 4 days. Maybe don't wrap certain service elements around it so that we, if not make money on them, at least break even and don't lose money on those. And that's really what I'm talking about, is being able to bundle that granular type of profitability analysis so that we really understand the proposition of the trade-off, the exchange we're making with certain customer product or customer service pairs.
Right. And so to that extent, he's also saying we can't do everything and hence need to prioritize. He also Carl brought up a point about what do you think about nurturing customers? Is that part of your discussion here?
That is a great question, Steve and Carl. Thank you. I am a big believer that business is art, and that information and analytics inform our art, but I don't think we should let information and analytics, at least to this point, maybe we'll get to a point in the future with artificial intelligence that it can actually dictate our decisions. But our decisions should be informed by the analytics. And I think what Carl is getting at is that we may have customers or customer segments or product or service lines that right now are unprofitable, but we think that the market potential is such that we are willing to continue to push these products or services or customer lines because while we're losing money on them now, in the future they're going to be a great profitable area for us.
Okay, great. Question or comment here from Nigel. Says, new players in your market will focus on selling more. If you focus on selling right, this risks market share and long-term value. But is there not a view that the bridge should focus on both right and more, exploiting shared capability to improve cost and keep promises this year whilst also being challenged to grow the business?
Totally agree. I foresee that a company that does this right is going to maintain volume and use that volume to drive economies of scale, et cetera, that we need in operations, and really manage that business such that we don't lose money on it, that it's a break even and it covers our capital outlays. And then our strategic segments, if you will, are the ones where we really optimize profitability. So I do agree that It's very rare where a company will really be able to say, we're going to exit this business and leave that volume behind and focus on other things, because we often need that volume to leverage the capital outlays that we need to do the real special things.
Great, thanks very much. Bob has a couple of questions here. Let's see what we can get to. First off, what shifts have you seen in human capital, HR considerations, and priorities among leading organizations that are furthest along in implementing value creation via integration of sales and operations?
Yeah, we have seen with the top companies that we work with tremendous changes in managing human resources and human capacity. In fact, the buzzword today that we all hear about is talent development, talent management, and the best companies view this as an integrated process that involves recruitment, development, retention, promotion, and it goes all the way to the operating level. And so I'll give you a couple of ways I see that manifested. For one thing, these companies don't have HR departments that are unique and separated from the business. The HR group is integrated in a matrix fashion with the business, and a lot of times people from the business are hired into HR, or at least do tours in HR, because they understand what the requirements are in the business. It is particularly true in supply chain, and I must admit that my biases are to the supply chain side, because that's my experience background, of HR really not knowing what it is that people in supply chain do. And so if your HR organization, they might be the most well-intentioned organization, but if they truly don't understand what the new competence levels are and requirements for people as they move through their careers, it's really tough for them to develop training programs. It's really tough for them to help develop incentive programs, et cetera. And so you get here's the set of videotapes that were made back in 1965 that we're going to have our people look at and show them how to do one particular technique, and it doesn't really help them contribute value in today's ever-changing dynamic environment. So that's step one. The HR organization has to be matrixed in to the business so that those folks really understand what the needs are. Talent development has to be tied to evaluation. I have actually worked with companies that have, as part of their evaluation tools, fielded recommendations that a manager can use, that when they do an evaluation on you for different competence levels, depending on how they score you, a little note will pop up that if you're scored as needs improvement or moving towards or something like that, it suggests different ways that the manager can refer you to training programs, maybe give you a little bit of budget allocation, make certain projects available to you as an employee so that you can develop that skill and move towards where we want you to go as an employee. So much more purposeful integration of talent development with the business side as opposed to a one-off.
Great, thanks very much. Gretchen noticed that most of the examples were generally direct to the consumer. Do you think DSI is more relevant to B2C than to B2B markets?
That's a great question as well. I think it's been born in consumer markets, and I think that B2B companies are increasingly trying to figure out how to employ it in their business places. In some ways, it might be simpler in B2B because the customer marketplace segments itself a bit easier from a product line standpoint. But I have seen it begun to be applied in more upstream type businesses like chemicals. I can't give away the company that we work with quite a bit, but there's a major chemical manufacturer that we work with that has applied these techniques specifically and worked with us to apply them. And the kind of stories they tell us about what they're doing along these 5 stages are pretty amazing. Unfortunately, I didn't have that developed at the time that we did this research. Otherwise, really good case in point that I need to put in some of the business-to-business examples into this presentation.
Interesting. David was wondering, do you think Amazon typifies DSI?
As much as I know about Amazon, which is predominantly as a consumer with a little bit of a chance to peek behind the curtain, I would say yes. I really believe that this is the way they manage their business. The senior vice president of global operations for Amazon is a University of Tennessee MBA graduate, and I have been able to have some conversations with him about the way they do things. One of the most impressive, and I don't know if anyone saw Dave Clark at the CSCMP annual conference 2 years ago. He was a keynote speaker for us. But he outlined how they go into new businesses. So they approach new businesses, new business offerings within Amazon as if it was a small business startup. And you have to have a champion for one of these ideas to get funded. And the champion has to come back to the executive group and say exactly what the profitability metrics are and what resources would be needed to reach that profitability within a relatively short period of time. And if the executive committee buys off on that, they immediately at that point give that manager the resources and essentially spin it off as a small business. And it's one of the reasons why Amazon has been able to stay so nimble, even though they're now a large company. So I do believe, and I would love greatly to be able to spend 2 years with Amazon and really understand what they're doing, but because what they're doing is so unique, they are relatively secretive about how they're getting it done. But I would believe that these concepts are highly applied within Amazon.
Sure. Great. Lots more great questions. Really appreciate the feedback from everyone here. Daniel wants to know, what role do you think artificial intelligence or cognitive computing could play in DSI, and do you have any current case studies or examples of that?
Yeah, we do. Clearly, that stage of integrated knowledge sharing is where artificial intelligence and cognitive computing is really going to play, and across all the others too. I think we are at the very early stages of truly understanding what cognition is going to be able to do. One of our partners is IBM, and IBM has staked their business on the fact that we are entering the cognitive era, which for a layperson like myself, I'm not an IT person, I think that cognition is the marriage of big data with artificial intelligence, so the ability to cull through massive amounts of data and be able to really understand trends and use it for predictive capability, prescriptive capability. I think that we are entering that realm, and as we move increasingly towards the Internet of Things, where all of our physical products are linked and we get that data, we move towards increasing amounts of information in transportation, so we're talking to trucks and trains and aircraft as product is moving. That data becomes available, and the better we get at plumbing that data and being able to understand in really detailed format what it's telling us from a value standpoint, from a total cost standpoint, the smarter we're going to be in decision making. So I mentioned IBM. They're making great strides. I think it's been really interesting to see how Watson, which I think in the past had been like a really interesting parlor game, it went on Jeopardy and won and did all kinds of beat chess masters. They're now using Watson to really drive business processes, and it'll be interesting to see what IBM is able to do with that. Caterpillar, we work a lot with Caterpillar, and Caterpillar is increasingly using big data and analytics and wants to start using increasing amounts of artificial intelligence to help them make long-term go-to-market decisions for products. So Daniel, absolutely, I think it's coming. I think the more we know about it, the better off we're going to be, and the more competitive we'll help our companies be.
Okay. Andrew wants to know, what are your thoughts on how DSI could be leveraged in service business context?
Yeah, we always get that question. Unfortunately, these examples manifest themselves so well in goods, particularly the earlier question, consumer goods businesses, that we sometimes only use those examples. I think that from a service industry standpoint, these concepts apply extremely well. And I'm going to use the service industry that I know the best, which is higher education. Right now I'm sitting in a business building, a business school, that has 7 different floors, really 6 that are used by the college. One of them has a bunch of servers on it. So the other 6 represent the 6 different academic departments in the College of Business. And each of those academic departments has an undergraduate major, master's programs, PhD programs, and yet we all contribute also to a cross-business program of an undergraduate degree and an MBA program, etc. Our decisions are never made with an eye towards those major customer segments of undergraduate programming, MBA programming, Masters of Science or Deep Analytical Masters, and PhDs. Rather, every little fiefdom makes their own resource allocation decisions, their own capacity decisions, their own market decisions. And if I were to ever become a dean, I would take this roadmap of DSI and use it to run our business, and it would make, obviously, some enemies among some people who are running businesses that, in my mind, we're not generating the required value out of, and yet we're spending a whole lot of resources on. But I think in the long run, particularly as a public school of business, we would serve our society a lot better. I think that mentality of how we allocate resources in a service industry in the form of people, as well as consumable supplies we need to deliver our services, the DSI model applies extremely well.
Okay, I think we can squeeze in another question here. Sharman mentions about supply chain disruptions. They're occurring more often than before. How should we deal with them, both natural and made?
Great question. I am a huge believer in the fact that risk profiling and the cost of disruption have to be a major factor in our cost models. It's hard to do. We know what it costs us to produce a widget. We know what it costs us to deliver a product to a customer. Those costs are easily quantifiable, and so we use those in our cost models. It's really difficult to calculate the costs of an earthquake in Japan that shuts down an automotive parts supplier that ultimately goes into our door units, that ultimately shuts down our assembly plant in Tennessee. And we have to get a lot smarter, and this is where some of the products I see using artificial intelligence are coming online to help us understand where we are most susceptible to disruption and what those costs of disruption are, so that we can use that in our cost models to truly figure out profitability.
Okay, thank you. Let's just try to squeeze in one more quick question here from Joe. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how big data will revolutionize the supply chain?
Yeah, we are increasingly partnering here in our academic units and all around. I know MIT has a huge capability in this, in supply chain strategy and operations, partnering with data analytics. I mentioned information control towers that the electronics manufacturer started implementing, and I've talked to several companies since then that have been working hard towards it. What that does is make true end-to-end information across the supply chain, from a fourth-tier supplier in inland China across all the different transportation assets all the way through delivery of a finished good. And we can get in one place transactional information across that whole supply chain. The first stage of the benefit of that kind of big data availability is better ability to trace and track and manage transactions, so that we can see, hey, something's been slowed down at the export port in Shanghai. We need to either do something to free it up or find another way for it to flow so it doesn't get slowed down. And that's the initial phase of benefit that big data brings. Beyond that, however, we manage all these transactions, and all of a sudden we turn around and we see that we have this incredible wealth of information that we now can use for diagnostic purposes. Is there one particular port that at a particular time of the year always slows our product down? Well, the smart money says maybe we don't use that port at that time of the year because they have something going on that takes capacity or slows it down, or weather. We have one supplier that is continually late on deliveries or has poor quality. So we can start using it diagnostically to make better decisions moving forward. And then I would say the third phase, again, is being able to apply that big data to artificial intelligence and learn from what we've done in the past and use it prescriptively to tell us how to do things differently in the future.
Okay, well, Ted, unfortunately, that is going to be all the time we have for today's session. A lot of great questions, great feedback from our poll. We greatly appreciate that from our audience. Over the next few business days, we want to just let our audience know that you please look out for a feedback survey that we'll send you via email. We greatly appreciate your thoughts and opinions to that as well. This concludes this portion of our program. Thank you again to our sponsor, Salient, and our presenter, Theodore Stank, Professor of Logistics and Supply Chain Management at the Haslam College of Business, University of Tennessee. Reminder that a recording of this program and presentation slides will be available within 3 to 4 business days. We'll send you an email as well. And we want to thank you all for attending today's program. Have a great day.
Thank you, Steve. Have a great day, everybody.